1999 was a weird year for horror. It was right at the edge of a shift, one foot in the gritty practical effects era and the other stepping toward the digital, global, and psychological horror that would define the next decade. These movies didn't follow one formula. Some leaned into extreme style, others into surreal nightmares, supernatural paranoia, or straight-up late-night VHS chaos. It was a year where horror experimented freely. Sometimes messy, sometimes unforgettable, but never boring. Tonight, we're revisiting 10 horror films from 1999 that show just how wild, uneven, and fascinating that moment really was. Wild Zero, 1999. A rock and roll obsessive stumbles into chaos when his favorite band, Guitar Wolf, gets caught in a standoff with local gangsters. From that moment on, his life spirals into something much larger. A passing comet triggers a global breakdown. Zombies rise, aliens appear in flying saucers, and the city collapses into noise and fire. Armed with nothing but devotion and a whistle that summons Guitar Wolf, he sets out to save the woman he loves, while the world disintegrates around him. The film moves less like a story and more like a sustained blast of attitude. Guitar Wolf play exaggerated versions of themselves, portrayed as near-mythic figures powered by sound, volume, and loyalty. Masashi Endo anchors the madness with sincere enthusiasm, treating rock culture as a moral code rather than a joke. Performances are intentionally broad, but never cynical. Effects are handmade and proudly rough. Explosions, zombie attacks, and alien appearances feel improvised and reckless, matching the film's energy. Editing favors speed over clarity, and the soundtrack never lets up. What holds it together is commitment. Every element believes completely in its own insanity. Wild Zero isn't about polish or structure. It's about momentum, identity, and choosing love without conditions. The message is simple but sincere, buried under distortion and chaos. For viewers open to something raw and unfiltered, it's unforgettable. Cherry Falls, 1999. A series of killings disrupts a quiet Virginia town with one disturbing pattern. Only students who haven't had sex are being targeted. Panic spreads quickly, forcing the community to confront both the violence and the social pressure surrounding it. As a sheriff investigates alongside his daughter, buried events from the town's past begin to surface. The film flips slasher logic without turning it into parody. Brittany Murphy plays the lead with restraint, navigating fear, expectation, and suspicion without becoming reactive. Michael Biehn brings authority and internal conflict to the sheriff role, while the supporting cast captures the uncomfortable closeness of small-town life. Violence is blunt and direct, avoiding elaborate staging. The emphasis stays on motive rather than method, and the mystery builds toward an explanation rooted in collective guilt rather than randomness. The story treats its premise seriously, allowing the subversion to emerge naturally. Cherry Falls stands out for engaging with its theme rather than exploiting it. Its release issues kept it from wider recognition, but the film remains one of the more thoughtful slashers of its era. Wishmaster 2. Evil Never Dies, 1999. The Djinn is released during a robbery and binds himself to a woman struggling with guilt over her partner's death. To free his kind, he must manipulate her into making 3 wishes. As she resists, the Djinn grants others desires with devastating literalism, slowly building toward catastrophe. The sequel narrows its focus. Holly Fields brings more emotional grounding than expected to the central role, while Andrew Divoff continues to define the Djinn through theatrical delivery and controlled menace. Supporting characters exist largely to demonstrate the consequences of careless desire. Effects-driven sequences remain the centerpiece. Wishes manifest through physical transformations and ironic outcomes, favoring creativity over realism. The confined settings limit scale but keep attention on individual moments. Wishmaster 2 understands its appeal and doesn't overreach. It delivers consistent tone, familiar mechanics, and a reliable central performance, functioning as a solid continuation rather than reinvention. Blood Dolls, 1999. Blood Dolls epitomizes late-period full moon, embracing camp, absurdity, and grotesque spectacle. A wealthy music producer creates miniature homicidal clones to punish those who wronged him, all while running a heavy metal band and maintaining a dungeon beneath his mansion. Narrative logic takes a back seat to deliberate eccentricity, with set pieces designed for shock, humor, and inventive visual absurdity. The dolls themselves, crude but unnerving, stalk their victims with meticulous, stiff movements that amplify their creepiness. Jack Maturin's performance elevates the material, delivering lines with operatic intensity that frames the chaos as dark, theatrical comedy. The captive musicians provide running commentary, a Greek chorus observing the madness. Violence is often suggested rather than explicit, maximizing suspense and impact within budget constraints. Blood Dolls unapologetically embraces its late-night cable identity, with erratic pacing and tonal shifts that feel chaotic, yet intentional. It found its audience among full-moon devotees, cult completists, and irony watchers. A film that celebrates the very strangeness that defined the studio's identity in the 90s. Virus, 1999. A salvage crew boards a drifting Russian research ship in the South Pacific, hoping to claim it for profit. Instead, they discover the vessel has been overtaken by a hostile intelligence that arrived via deep space transmission. The entity has fused itself to the ship's systems and begun reconstructing a physical form using human bodies and machinery. Jamie Lee Curtis plays a practical leader focused on survival, while Donald Sutherland brings instability and obsession to a captain increasingly aligned with the ship itself. William Baldwin fills the role of reluctant ally, and the rest of the cast functions as expendable workers caught in escalating danger. Where the film distinguishes itself is in creature design. Practical effects dominate, presenting cybernetic hybrids that merge flesh and metal in disturbing ways. Hallways, engine rooms, and control centers become traps, reinforcing the ship as an extension of the threat. Action scenes rely on physical stunts and controlled explosions rather than spectacle alone. Virus doesn't reinvent the genre, but it commits to its premise. The pacing is steady, the effects are tangible, and the tone stays serious. It's a functional late 90s creature film elevated by strong practical work. Stir of Echoes, 1999. After being hypnotized at a neighborhood party, a working-class father begins experiencing unsettling visions. He sees fragments of a teenage girl who was murdered years earlier, reliving moments tied to her disappearance. What starts as curiosity becomes fixation, pulling him away from his family and placing him in danger as buried truths come closer to the surface. The film grounds its supernatural elements in routine life. Kevin Bacon plays the lead as a man already restless before the visions begin, his frustration and obsession feeding off one another. Catherine Irby balances the story as his wife, watching something she can't see slowly dismantle their stability. The supporting cast fills out the neighborhood with quiet suspicion rather than overt menace. Visions arrive in short, fragmented bursts. Sounds, flashes, impressions, never lingering long enough to feel safe. The horror comes less from spectacle and more from accumulation, as the mystery points toward shared guilt and long-standing silence. Violence, when it appears, is direct and uncomfortable rather than stylized. Stir of Echoes works as both ghost story and investigation. It favors tension over surprise and character over twists. Overshadowed on release, it holds up as a disciplined, grounded, supernatural thriller driven by performance rather than gimmick. In Dreams, 1999, a children's book illustrator begins experiencing vivid nightmares that appear to predict real-world murders. As the visions escalate, she realizes she's psychically connected to a killer whose traumatic childhood still defines his actions. When her daughter becomes a target, the boundary between dream and waking life collapses. The film embraces heightened reality. Annette Bening plays the lead as someone unraveling under sensory overload, committing fully to the role's instability. Supporting performances function as emotional anchors, though the narrative prioritizes internal experience over logic. Visually, the film leans into surrealism. Flooded towns, distorted landscapes, symbolic imagery that replaces realism. The horror unfolds through suggestion and metaphor rather than linear progression. Sound design and score emphasize disorientation. In Dreams is uneven but ambitious. Its ideas often overwhelm its structure, but the commitment to mood and imagery gives it a distinct identity. It's less a thriller than an extended psychological descent. Stigmata, 1999. An atheist woman begins experiencing unexplained wounds that mirror those associated with religious martyrdom. After receiving rosary beads sent by her mother, the manifestations intensify, drawing attention from a Vatican investigator tasked with determining whether the events are real or staged. As the symptoms worsen, messages surface tied to a suppressed religious text that challenges institutional authority. Patricia Arquette carries the role physically, enduring extended makeup effects and demanding scenes that emphasize exhaustion and confusion. Gabriel Byrne plays the investigator as conflicted rather than certain, navigating belief and obedience without easy answers. Their interactions keep the story grounded as the visuals escalate. Stylistically, the film reflects its era. Rapid editing, aggressive music cues, and heightened color grading dominate, sometimes overpowering the underlying narrative. The wound effects are detailed and unsettling, presented as sudden intrusions rather than slow reveals. Religious imagery is used symbolically rather than philosophically. Stigmata functions best as visceral horror rather than thoughtful debate. Its ideas are broad, but the physical impact is effective. While dated in presentation, it remains a striking snapshot of late 90s religious thrillers driven by mood and intensity. Ringu 2, 1999. Following the aftermath of the original curse, researchers attempt to understand Sadako's videotape and its lingering effects. As they study survivors and protect a young child connected to the events, it becomes clear the curse is no longer static. It's changing, spreading, and finding new pathways. The film expands its mythology cautiously. Returning characters provide continuity, while new investigations push the story forward. Performances remain restrained, maintaining emotional realism even as supernatural elements increase. Unlike the original, the sequel shows more. Manifestations are clearer, and Sadako's presence is more direct. The horror shifts from suggestion to inevitability, framing the curse as something that adapts rather than ends. Ringu 2 trades mystery for expansion. While it loses some subtlety, it offers a thoughtful continuation that explores consequences rather than repetition. Ravenous, 1999. Few horror films feel as truly one-of-a-kind as Ravenous. Directed by Antonia Bird, it's a darkly comic, savage, and strangely beautiful story about hunger. For food, for power, and for survival. Set during the Mexican-American War, it follows a disgraced soldier, played by Guy Pearce, who's sent to a remote mountain outpost in the Sierra Nevada. When a stranger, Robert Carlyle, arrives claiming his wagon party was attacked by cannibals, the soldiers head into the mountains to investigate, and quickly realize the real danger isn't behind them. Carlyle's performance is electric, alternating between charming and monstrous, and the film morphs from historical drama into blood-soaked nightmare. What sets Ravenous apart is its tone. It's a cannibal movie, yes, but it's also slyly funny, using dark humor to explore human greed and consumption. The score, by Damon Albarn of Blur and composer Michael Nyman, shifts from playful banjo rhythms to dissonant horror cues, keeping you off balance. The film's production was chaotic. 2 directors left before Bird was hired, yet somehow it became one of the most unique horror films of the 90s. It flopped in theaters, but critics and fans have reappraised it as a masterpiece of mood and metaphor. Watching it now, Ravenous feels like a gothic fever dream. Funny one moment, horrifying the next. It's the kind of film that couldn't exist today when everything needs to fit a formula. In 1999, it didn't fit any, and that's what makes it unforgettable.